Talk about using PowerShell for data exfiltration techniques. And this is going to be a really fun webcast because what I'm going to do is expose some of the techniques that I do, whether it's a traditional pen test where it's just me against the defenders, or what I do when I'm on a blue team engagement where I'm trying to find things to look for at the network layer or at the host layer. And then, of course, when I'm doing a purple team engagement where I'm straddling both sides. So whether or not you're a pen tester, this is going to be a really cool webinar for you. So let's dive right in. As Carol said, I'm a certified SANS instructor. I teach both 504 and 555, and they complement one another very well, and I have a whole lot of fun teaching them. And in my spare time, when I'm not teaching for SANS, I'm the managing partner at InfoSec Innovations. We're a boutique security firm that does some really interesting things and have a lot of fun building exotic defenses for our clients. Now, I mentioned earlier that I do teach all over the world, and I do. I've got two upcoming back-to-backs where I'm going to be in Tokyo, Japan, and London, and that's going to be awesome. I just got done teaching 555 in New York City, and we had an absolute blast. So if you have the ability to go to these, please do. And I also teach 504, and you'll note that I've got one upcoming in Bangalore, India, just next week. So in just over 24 hours, I am going to board a jet and head on to the other side of the world. So it's going to be a wild ride. Now, a lot of people do the thank yous at the end of the talk. That's a little weird. I like to do it at the start. I want to thank Adam Crompton from InGuardians. He did a lot of the inspiration for this. Also, Josh Johnson and John Strand have heavily influenced this talk that I'm about to give. So let's start talking about what we're going to be talking about today, the definitions. And the reason we need to have these definitions is that a lot of people are using exfiltration in ways that I don't necessarily agree with. And so I just want a common definition for exfiltration or exfil. And from Wikipedia, it says that it's a near synonym for data theft or unauthorized release of data from within a computer system or network. And the two things that I want to point out is data theft and release of data. The whole concept here is that we are taking data out of the network. Now, if you are a pen tester, you need to understand that that may or may not be a victory condition for your pen test. As a defender, you need to understand that in many cases, especially if it's financial attacks, they are not going to be doing data theft. They are going to be altering existent data in your networks. However, with things the way they are, bad guys can stand to make a whole lot of money by stealing data and selling it on the black market. So you really do need to test your network to see how difficult it is for the bad guys to grab the data and just walk out the door. Now, when we're talking exfiltration, there's a multiple ways of doing it. And at a very high level way of thinking about it, you can do it from a digital standpoint where you're stealing data and streaming it across the network via a variety of ways. Maybe you're going to be writing some key files to a USB, maybe bypassing some USB access restriction policies that prevent that from happening as a normal user. And it can be things that are really low tech too. It could be something as simple as sending an email. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking digital. We're somehow moving binary data across the network or via some means, and it's out of the network, out of the corporate environment, and into the hands of the bad guys. Now, I want you to understand that there's actually a more serious thing that is typically done that we discover when we do investigations, and that is physical. Many organizations forget about the risks that happen when someone prints data out, and this actually was a problem a couple of years back in the United States. There was a member of an agency. I won't name the agency because they had a rough time, but the spy basically was printing out sensitive documents, rolling them up and stuffing them in his socks and taking them out every single day when he left for work. Physical attacks can be incredibly devastating, and we need to be doing a good job of watching that. The problem is today we're talking about PowerShell, and while PowerShell is incredibly powerful, PowerShell cannot help you against somebody who's printing documents and stuffing them in their socks, at least not yet. So today we're going to be focusing on network-based exfiltration techniques and how it works. So some things about exfiltration that you need to understand, a few reminders. Number one, you want to get caught. I'll have a slide on this here in a moment, but the bottom line is you want your clients to know what their detection rates are and allow them to adjust accordingly if they need to or if they're so inclined. You also need to use safe data. We'll dive significantly into that in a moment. And then finally, this may need to be done as a special engagement because they can be very lengthy processes. So first of all, getting caught. You absolutely positively want to be caught. You're going to do different exfiltration techniques, and I will be going over several different exfiltration methods during our time together today. But what your ideal end state is when you give the report, you're going to show the client something a little like this. And this is based off of a talk that John Strand gave at DerbyCon a few years ago called How Not to Suck at Pen Testing. If you haven't seen that talk, I strongly encourage you to watch it. It is an amazing, amazing talk that still is something that many practitioners in the InfoSec field need to watch. You'll note one thing is that there's going to be times that you get caught and you want your client to get credit for that, because otherwise, if you give them a report that just looks like it's been dipped in ink and every single attack works, they're going to get demoralized. And it's also not a fair report because when a regulator or maybe an insurance company looks at this, they're going to have a false understanding of their actual risk profile. So depending on the maturity of a client, you may have more defensive successes than you have defensive fails. And you know what? That's okay, because I don't know any single pen tester out there that's getting paid by the finding. So make sure you show what the client is doing and how they're doing well. Another thing to talk about is the pen tester's Hippocratic Oath. While attacking my client, I will do no harm. If you are stealing really like actual live client data, stop. Really, like, that is complete amateur hour and absolutely unacceptable. What you should be doing instead is generating fake data or having the client provide you fake data so that when it gets sent out the network, there's no harm to the client or their clients. And the other thing is, you are not going to be subject to regulatory scrutiny. I actually know a pen tester who was doing data exfiltration via SQL injection, and the way he did it actually made his system in scope for the next PCI audit. So the way to do this, real quick, I just want to slide over to this. You can use resources like cardgenerator.com, and you can actually have them mass generate credit cards for you so that you're not dealing with real live data. And then from there, you simply say which format you want. We're going to do CSV, and here you go. You've got plenty of data that looks legitimate. Your DLP solutions, your next-gen firewall, all those sorts of tools should trigger on this. But you know what? It's not real. Even if the data goes walkabout somehow, there's no harm to the client. So please, please understand the Hippocratic Oath. Some other things to talk about when it comes to special engagements. It can take a long while to do this work. I'm going to, in fairly rapid order, show you a couple different tools and techniques that I use on pen tests when I'm using PowerShell, but it honestly may take a full week to just work on getting data out, and it is tedious. This is one of the more, I hate to say this, but it can be one of the more boring sections of a pen test, and this is why I find using PowerShell very handy, because it can help with the automation. Another thing to point out, though, is that when you start doing these sorts of engagements, or when these become part of the victory condition for an existing engagement, you need to set expectations with your clients very carefully, because the very first couple rounds, I would say, depending on the client, but it's usually the first 3 engagements where we're doing data exfiltration, it's a bloodbath. We're able to get all sorts of data out, and you'll understand here in a bit when we go through and start talking about what attackers can do and how they do that. So we're now at the part where we're going to be using PowerShell, and this is what you all came for. And we're now all at the same playing field. Now, the reason that we want to use PowerShell as our attack framework is that it's an API glue. I'll be showing you guys some really cool things about PowerShell, specifically its ability to plug into the .NET primitives. So .NET and PowerShell are both installed on every Windows system out there. And what's amazing about this now is that because you have this API glue that's on all Windows systems, you're able to do all manner of interesting attacks that would have been very tedious to do and had a higher rate of detection. Make no mistake, all the things that I'm going to be showing you today could be done and still would work using VB script or other scripting techniques like Windows script. WScript. The problem with these is that they're a little more detectable, because not everybody's going to be executing or having VBScript files on their systems. So PowerShell as a pen tester makes a glorious system to leverage. And frankly, a lot of the bad guys are doing this because it just works. So we now have why we're using PowerShell. Let's show what the bad guys are doing with it. One of them is the raw socket. Basically, they open up a connection, shove data out that connection, and the data's gone. And if you've ever played around with Netcat, you know already what I'm talking about. The other one that is used a lot is HTTP or HTTPS. Because PowerShell can invoke web requests or make web connections on your behalf, you have the ability as an attacker to actually send data out the network and have it look like normal web traffic. So that is super scary and very, very difficult to detect unless you know what you're looking for. But there's plenty of other techniques that the bad guys use. I've seen them exfiltrate data just as attachments, or maybe use steganography and mail it out. And let's not forget other protocols, things like VoIP that allows outbound connections, or Quick, which is a protocol that's used by the Chrome browser. There's all kinds of different techniques. Now today, we're going to be covering only the raw socket and the HTTP, HTTPS, mainly just because we only have so much time. Now, the raw socket approach is very, very easy. You need to find what ports are permitted outbound, open that socket, and then send data out to that socket. And it really is as simple as I make it sound. So let's do a demo of a raw socket exfiltration technique. Now, the easiest way to see, step one, was see if a particular port is open and permitting outbound communications. Now, in my network, I have a machine that I'm trying to send data to on port 5555. And that machine is this. I'm going to use the testnet TCP testnet connection and use port 555, 55 or 4 5s, and then I'm going to go to 192.168.1.203. Now, in this case, this should fail because the port is not open on that machine yet. But I just want to show you how easy it is to determine what ports are open and running. And this should fail. See, the TCP test succeeded, fail, but ping succeeded was true. So that means that that machine is reachable. It's just that that port wasn't open and running. So let's fix that right now. Here I am setting up a netcat listener on, for those of you who are 504 students, 560 or 580 students, this machine will be familiar to you. I'm repurposing our VM that we use in those classes. I'm going to start my netcat listener, and I'm now going to slide over to this machine, run the same command, and you should see that the TCP test succeeded equals true. And in this case, we see now that it is open and running. So at this point, we now know that there's a port open and listening. Now we just need to send data to it. And there's a wide variety of ways that you can do this. I'm a big fan of PowerCat because I'm one of the co-authors of it. And the thing that you need to understand about PowerCat is just how easy it is to get set up and running. So I'm on the GitHub page for PowerCat, and we'll share that in just a moment. But I'm on the GitHub page for PowerCat. I go back to my command prompt, and just to show you that PowerCat's not installed or running, I can type PowerCat, and it says it's not recognized. I paste this, run this, and now when I type PowerCat, I get information about what mode do I want it to run in. So now all I would need to do, and it's super easy to get up and running, you're going to set up your PowerCat listener and send a file via PowerCat. So what I'm going to do is set up my attacker listener machine here, and I am going to receive a file via this technique. Do my shell redirect where the output of this netcat goes into PowerCat stolen.txt. Okay, so now I have my listener running, and on this machine here, I have a file named cc-infotext. And this CC infotext is a file that I created using that website that I mentioned earlier. So now what I can do is I can do PowerCat client or connect mode to 192.168.1.203, and my input file is ccinfo.txt. Oops. Need to specify my port, and I'm going to do 5555. And now, if all went well, this should have sent this file. And here we can see I have successfully exfiltrated data using a raw socket. Now, one thing to point out, this is very low level, but it works. Simply doing reconnaissance on the outbound connections, I can see what ports are allowed to what external hosts. And the beauty of this is it not only does it works well from the attacker side, but there's good news. Defenders take heart. Number one, your firewall should work both ways. You should be blocking outbound connections. The other thing, though, is every firewall out there has the ability, with a little bit of work, some more than others, to do port protocol mismatches. So if I'm sending outbound to, say, port 80 on this attack machine, you would see that. It wouldn't look like HTTP traffic. So look for port protocol mismatches. So going back to the presentation, PowerCat is available. It's a rather mature product at this point. There's a few tweaks that will eventually be done, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. And as ever, I love to give a shout out to Luke Baggett whenever I talk about PowerCat, because he took the original proof of concept version that I had and made it infinitely better than what I had. And his version is the version that it largely is. Now, there are forks of PowerCat. That's cool. That's awesome. That's how it's supposed to work. It's open source software. There were people who liked had some features that they would have liked to have added, and I didn't have time to put them in, so they forked it and made it, and that's awesome. So go keep rocking, PowerCat forkers. Now, here's how PowerCat. Yeah, go ahead.
Got a quick question. From Andy, can't you detect on PowerCat existence?
So you can. That's actually a great point, Andy. There's a couple things that you can detect on. Number one, if the user is downloading the PS1 file and invoking it from the disk, you could detect that via file integrity monitoring or other types of detects. The other thing that you can do is detect it from the command line logs. PowerShell version 5 has the ability to do built-in transcriptions, and you should turn that on so you would see the transcript of the command that people are running and what that output is. That would be very detectable. And you can also detect it with script block logging. The problem is that for many organizations, they don't have this enabled, or they have it enabled, but they're not collecting it from the endpoints. So as an attacker, I usually will phish someone and get into their desktop and then do the attack from there. The reason why is a lot of the defenders are watching what attackers are doing on the servers, and that's all well and good, but the problem is you're basically blind because a lot of the attacks are being done at client side and have been for years. So awesome question. Any other questions?
One more, Mick. During the demo, when showing the raw socket demo, you did the test and it failed because the receiving device wasn't listening on that port. But how would you know if it was an issue with the receiving device versus network controls on the network you are attempting to exfil from?
That is an outstanding question. So the reason that you would know is that this machine, I'm going to slide over to that system. This machine here, my attacker machine, is a machine I control. So if I have a port open and listening and I'm not able to interact with that port, I can infer that something somewhere between that machine and where I'm at in the network is filtering that traffic in some manner. Now, if you absolutely positively need to see where that filtering is taking place, there's an older technique that you can look into called firewalking, where you basically will start playing games with the time to live on your packets and try to see which device is filtering the packets. Now, it's not perfect. Firewalking can be a little slow, and because you're modifying the time to live, that is an observable thing, and it looks weird. If the IDSs or IPSs are configured to look for that, you will generate alarms. But that is one option that you can do to try to figure out what's happening and where. That's an awesome question. Any other questions, awesome or otherwise?
That's it for now. Okay. We'll a few to come back to on you.
All right. So the reason that PowerCat works and the power behind PowerCat and the reason that this works is PowerShell makes use of .NET primitives. And in this case, we're using a system net, the network namespace, and in it, there's this socket namespace. And that allows us to open up a socket, whether it's TCP or UDP. And in this case, you're looking at the UDP portion of PowerCat. And what you can do is just open that socket, send data down the stream. And This is the heart and soul of why PowerShell makes such an excellent exfiltration framework. Sliding over to my browser here, I want to show you there on the .NET, I'm sorry, Microsoft's TechNet, they have a great resource that walks you through the system.NET namespace. And these classes are the things that you can use as an attacker. So you can make FTP web requests, you can make HTTP web requests, you can do any manner of things. And in fact, later on, I'll show you some of the things that we're going to do via HTTP. So the idea here is that these are functions already built into the OS. Antivirus isn't going to trip them because it's part of the OS. And so using this, you can slide through network pretty easily and quickly. One thing that I would encourage you to do is spend some time learning how HTTP and PowerShell work. In the interest of time, we're only going to focus on HTTP, but many of the techniques are very, very portable over to HTTPS. One of the reasons that I am adamant that both attackers and defenders need to learn this and learn this well is that the actual bad guys are doing this and they're kicking our teeth in. Back when attackers were first getting serious about going into corporate networks, a lot of the command and control was being done over IRC or other lesser used protocols. Now what they're doing is they're dodging these port protocol mismatches. They're dodging these odd traffic issues by using HTTP. And the reason why is in many organizations, you're allowed to just surf the web and it's not a big issue. Now, from time to time, I will hear people say, but we have a web proxy. And I say, I don't care. I want to reiterate, I don't care. Using this code, I am actually able to pull the default web proxy from the system config and connect it to your own corporate web proxy using the logged in user's credentials and bypass your proxy. I'm not bypassing it, I'm actually using your proxy. And it's dynamite because now what I can do is I look like a normal web user, I'm going through your corporate sanctioned web proxy, and unless you're actually inspecting what I'm doing, I'm going to fly completely below the radar. Now, I've already shown a couple times how I've been using PowerShell to download files, and this is probably the most common use of PowerShell in the penetration testing community are these download cradles, where you're going to make a download string pointing to some resource that you want to get, and you're using the system.NET web client. In this case, system is optional. You don't have to put this. So a lot of people will abbreviate it by just doing net.webclient, and they will have their download string. And in this case, this IEX is invoke expression. What this will do is actually launch this PowerShell code directly into memory without touching the disk. This is done to bypass execution restriction policies and also basically makes disk-based forensics very, very tricky to do and rough. So what I would encourage you to do is check out the repository that Harmjoy has listed here. It is an amazing resource. Much love and respect to him and the work that he does. So keep doing what you're doing, amigo. Now, the last slide, we were using a cradle to download things. Notice that we're doing a download string. If you go to the system.net.webclient, oops, let's go this way. There's other methods that are available. You can do an upload string and upload files. And let me just show you what some of the capabilities are. Your web client class has a variety of different methods that are available. You can, like I said, you can upload a file, upload specific data sets, you can upload strings. These are all capable easily within how this framework works. And don't worry, we're going to get to a demo here real soon. And there's plenty of things that you can do that takes it even further. You can alter or create cookies so that you're actually exfiltrating data via the cookies that are sent, or you can set up custom headers or anything. Remember, any traffic that's going out to a web server, a quote unquote web server that we control as the attacker, allows us to receive that telemetry. So let's start doing some demos here. What I've got, let's close this out. What I've got are a series of PowerShell scripts that illustrate different capabilities of using web traffic as an exfiltration method. So for instance, what I can do is show you this HTTP client PowerShell script. And what this one does is I'm going to send a single file, in this case, my credit card info.txt file. I'm going to send it to a server that I control at a port that I know is available and open. Then what I will do is invoke a web client, and when I feed it this URI, it will actually then be staged, and I can execute the upload process via this. And folks, I want to tell you, this is super duper easy and effective. I'm going to go over to my attack machine that is going to receive the data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a netcat listener on port 5555. And I am going to take that input and put it into HTTP stolen. And now I'm just waiting for this attack to take place. Go over to this machine and I run the HTTP client attack. And it doesn't give you any status that it's done. I'm just going to hit Control-C a couple times. Go over to my attack machine, and now I can see that I have my HTTP stolen.txt file. And I'm going to less that file to view the contents. And you'll note that I actually have two things of interest here. Number one, at the bottom half of this screen, you're seeing the credit card text file that I stole. So that's this part right here. This is the actual file that was stolen, but you'll also see that I have the web browser connection info. You can see that it was a post made and all the different header information. We as attackers can take advantage of that and actually do things where instead of uploading a file via a post is highly suspicious. This does not happen normally in web traffic. I mean, it does, but it doesn't happen in a great frequency. What's much better, and in my opinion, is to hide by creating a exfil method that looks a lot less tricky or is maybe more expected. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to steal data via cookies. Now, for those of you who don't know, cookies are little bits of data that get sent with each web request to an appropriate domain. And I'll show you how to do this right now. In this case, I have a connect that's being done like normal. However, I'm using a different method. Instead of doing a web client, I am doing a thing called a web request session. And this is a little different in that I'm not actually using a, I'm now simulating being a browser in PowerShell. And in this case, what I'm doing is I'm creating a cookie object. I'm naming it exfil cookie so that it's easy to see that it's an attack taking place. And then you would put your secret data that you want to exfiltrate out here. And then you have to specify the domain. Otherwise, PowerShell will honor the restrictions on which cookies get sent to where. And so because I'm sending it to this domain in this URL that I'm sending it to, this needs to match. If this doesn't match, this cookie value won't get sent. So now what's going to happen is, instead of having anything that looks out of the ordinary, I'm going to just use cookies, which are part of the HTTP spec, in a way that folks weren't anticipating. So what I'm going to do is run my cookie, and it'll take just a second. Oh, unable to connect to the remote server. Let's see why that is. Oh, I didn't hit enter. So that's an easy fix. We now have a listener up and running. Run the script again. Go over to the attack machine, kill our listener. And now you'll see I have a new file, the cookies stolen.txt. And I can less that file. And you'll see now that I have this cookie value that I set. Now, as an attacker, this is an interesting proof of concept. And when I'm doing a pen test, what I will usually do is send a cookie in the clear to see if that gets caught. But a real attacker would never ever do this. What they're really going to do is they're going to take a file and they're going to encode it, chop up that encoded file, and send it a piece at a time. So I have a script that will show you what that looks like. Encoded cookies stolen. So going over to my machine, I can now run, and I'll show you the script in just a second, but now what I'm going to do is my cookie encoded, and you can see this is the encoded string that gets sent. Go over to my attack receive machine and the listener, and I now have a new file, this encoded cookie stolen. So we less that file to review it. And you can see what I've done here is I've made some changes to make this look a little more less suspicious. You'll note that I've changed the cookie name from being exfil cookie to session ID, and we have some base64 encoding that's taking place. Now, the thing that's really cool about doing this in PowerShell is just how easy this is to accomplish. All you need to do is have your super secret stuff that you don't want to get out across the network, and then you set up the text encoding, and we then, once it's encoded, we set it to base64, and then we now have our encoded text. And just as before, when we're setting up our cookie, we changed the cookie name from, evil cookie or exfil cookie to session ID, and then we put our encoded text. Now, as part of a pen test, what I would do is chop a file up into pieces parts, and then from there, I would be able to exfiltrate it. And this is a powerful, powerful way to bypass DLP. Now, I want to be clear, DLP is a good solution if used appropriately. My problem is when it's sold as a catch-all wonder miracle, and quite frankly, it's not, because you can see right here how easy it is to bypass many DLP solutions. And there are some DLP vendors out there that'll say, oh, well, we can decode the base64. Look, folks, if that's what your claim to fame is, I've got really bad news, because I don't have to do base64 encoding. I can do different encoding schemes. I can do all kinds of shenanigans, and the attackers do. You'll notice right now, one of the more popular things, instead of encoding them to base64, what they're actually doing is a character shift, where they shift the characters a set number of positions, so that A becomes C, and that simple shift is enough to bypass most DLP solutions out there. In fact, all of them that I've been run into. So this is a very, very fun and powerful technique. But it doesn't stop there. It gets even worse. The final thing that I want to show you is the concept of headers. When it comes to headers within HTTP, we're allowed to actually extend and add our own headers into the requests that get sent to the server. And then the server, if it is configured to do so, can extend the header response. In this case, what I'm going to be doing is extending the header in a client request, meaning an outbound connection to a server we control, and I am going to send sensitive data in just the header. So here's how you go about doing this. We slide over to our attack machine, we set up our netcat, and I'm just using netcat because it's an easy way to receive the data. In the real world, I would actually set up a real web server. And what I'm going to do is headers stolen. So now we're listening at that port, slide over to our victim machine that's doing the exfiltration. And now we send the data over. And again, just as before, I'll show the script after it's done working. Just as before, we slide over to our attacker machine. We now have this header stolen, and we can bless this file, and now we see this header that I extended. X by convention right here. X by convention indicates that it's an extended header, something that isn't standard. And in this case, I'm sending the text super secret stuff. So, use whatever data you want. And typically what you would do in an attack campaign, again, is slice up a file and have some sort of ongoing web requests going back and forth, and it slides below the radar because it looks like normal web traffic. Now, let me show you just how easy this is to accomplish within PowerShell. All you need to do, this is very similar to the cookie technique where you're adding cookie values. In this case, all I need to do is add a header type and then the name of that header that I want as it to appear, and then the value of that header. That's it. So if you're seeing this and thinking, wow, this is a pretty low bar, this is something that I should be doing, this is something that is a little scary, yeah, you're right on all of these. What kills me is that so few people are doing this. And for goodness sakes, you see just how simple these scripts are, and these are all based off of lookups from the different methods that the .NET framework supports for web client or web request. You can simply go to the TechNet resource, find what parameters it's looking for, and you're off to the races. So the barrier for entry for doing very interesting exfiltration exercises is actually really low. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do is, while there are plenty of good exfiltration frameworks out there, and I think that there is a certain value of testing those known exfiltration tools in your environment or in your client's environments, I think that there's an even bigger win when you start building your own exfiltration capabilities, because quite frankly, it's not that hard. So get out there, start playing, and have some fun. Thank you for your time, and I'll now turn it over to Jason, who I'm sure has quite a few questions.
I do. Real quick, first question is the exfil cookie dropped to disk?
The cookie that's a great question. I don't know what the caching is behavior for PowerShell. I'm going to have to do some research on that. That's an amazing question. I literally don't know, though.
And then I feel like you addressed this question by breaking the cookie up into smaller pieces, but are there limits on cookie size, and would network controls detect large cookies?
So network controls can detect large cookies. I have yet to see anyone that catches that, and part of the reason why is there's a thing that Microsoft does in their web forms called __ view state. You need to take a look at that thing. It's horrible. It can be huge. As part of a pen test, I once had a view state that turned into 5 pages of printed text at 10-point font. So yes, it can be detected. Yes, it is a little abnormal, but yeah, it actually does happen from time to time.
And before we answer another question, I just wanted to let everyone know that Mick has 2 other pen testing with PowerShell Webcast coming up, one on September 4th, local privilege escalation technique, and one on September 6th, automating the boring so you can focus on the fun. So that is on September 4th and September 6th. If you want to listen live, if you're listening to a recording of this, you can check the archives and find those at sans.org/webcast. All right. Next question, Mick. I ran into end users that are alerting on PowerShell. Do you have a recommendation to get around this?
Yeah, so it depends. That's a great thing, and I'm happy that it's becoming more common. It depends on how they're alerting. Some people are only looking for the existence of PowerShell.exe being run, in which case you can use things like Ben 10's not PowerShell, where you're actually invoking the system automation DLLs that are the underpinnings of PowerShell. The other thing that you could look into that may help, depending on, again, on what they're looking for, is a framework called invoke obfuscation. There was I think it was a talk at Hackfest a couple of years ago, and it was absolutely scary. So go check out invoke obfuscation.
And Mick, just a general question. Does your knowledge of PowerShell for pen testing come from engagements, or does it come from lab testing? Where are you getting the chance to practice this?
Great question. Typically, what I do is I follow what people are doing on Twitter, and I'll see some interesting technique, and I'll play around with it in a lab and riff on it for a bit. And then once I'm comfortable using it, I will chat with a client. I've got some clients that I'm fortunate enough that I can just call them up and say, hey, here's this technique. I'd like to consume a few hours that we have already in the bank. Can we test this on your network to see if this works as expected? So that's the typical way for me. But you definitely want to use lab time, because don't run code in prod, at least not the first time.
Question from Gene. From the customer perspective, what can a defender do to detect an exfil via cookies or via the header?
So there's a variety of things that can be done when it comes to detecting this. Number one, the techniques that I did, I was sending very short strings. That means that you're going to have to send a fairly frequent poll interval to the machine that's receiving that data. So what you can do is look for beaconing behavior, and there's a variety of tools out there that can help you see that. If you're using an ELK stack, you may want to check out a tool written by a SANS instructor, Austin Taylor. It's called Flare, and it does an amazing job of beaconing detection. Another tool that you can use to detect it is from Black Hills InfoSec called Rita, which allows you to detect beacons. But the other thing that you can look for from a defender standpoint is, if you notice, like that header, that X header, if you're doing HTTP inspection, you can do a count of show me the header values that are unique. And in that case, only one machine, the attacker machine that's sending the data out, is going to have that header. So it's a very detectable thing. You just need to look for it.
Thanks. Do you have advice can PowerShell be used for forensics?
Yes, PowerShell absolutely can be used for forensics. There's several great forensics frameworks out there. Probably the most famous and well-known is Invoke IR. So that's invoke-IR, and it's a really powerful way of determining what's happening to different systems. Another one that I'm a huge fan of was written by Dave Hall, called Kanza, and it's a very, very popular one here at SANS. A lot of our classes use Kanza in a forensics manner to find what sort of network traffic is taking place, what programs are being run on different systems. So yeah, PowerShell absolutely is a great tool for that.
Real quick for everyone listening, if you've enjoyed these PowerShell pen testing, PowerShell for pen testing webcasts, let us know. So that way we can either make some new ones or encourage Mick to want to keep coming back for these. And then the other thing is, Mick, in a SANS training course, you did a demo today. So you talked about something, you did a demo. Are the students able to do what you're doing in class? Like, is there lab time? Is there instructional time? Just can you give a quick breakdown of how SANS class works?
Yeah, so there's ample opportunity to go quote unquote off-roading, as it were. So in a SANS class, there's instruction and then there's dedicated lab time. During that lab time, you'll have a set of objectives that you'll run through. And if you finish those early, I and most instructors will give like extra homework, like here's some bonus things that you can do during your time. And other classes actually have dedicated boot camp time. So Security 555 is an interesting class because while the instruction ends at 5 o'clock, give or take, depending on questions and the speed that we can go through the material, it actually has dedicated lab time that goes until 7 p.m. every single day. So you absolutely have the time and ability to do this sort of off-roading if you so choose.
And I believe my last question today will be from Paul. Are there any books or resources you'd recommend for learning PowerShell apart from TechNet articles?
So unfortunately, I have not found too many great books with PowerShell. And part of the reason why is PowerShell is such a great self-documenting tool. What I usually do is within PowerShell, I make extensive use of the Git help. So I will do Git help, say, like if I'm wanting to do network things, I'll do network. And I'll do Git help network, and it will give you different commandlets that work, that have something to do with networking or network in the command or the function that they do. Another thing that I like to do is I run the command git command, and this will show all the commands that are available on that installed machine. It is a very, very long list, but when you run this, you'll understand what your capabilities are and what's out there. So those two are how I find the commands to run, or typically what I do. And then once I start playing around with something that is of interest to me, I will pipe it to git member, which will tell me what sort of objects it takes. So for instance, when we do like invoke web request, what I can do is actually pipe that to git member, and in this case, it's going to ask for some info, so I'm just going to do example.com. Oh, let's do this. Invoke request, example.com, pipe it to git member. Huh, that's the first. I typically don't see it die like that. Let me get you another one real fast, just so that I'm not ending on a low note here. Let's do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a web variable named web session, like that. And so now what I can do is when I do web session, I can pipe that to git member, and I can see what different components it takes. So in this case, I can see that I can set the headers, I can modify cookies, I can send credentials, like whatever you want. So using git help, git command, and git member, I'm usually able to do a lot of my PowerShell development without having to do too much external resources. It takes a little bit of time getting used to doing it that way because, you know, we're so used to reading books or going to Google. But believe it or not, PowerShell is kind of my development platform when I'm flying because I don't need the internet.
Mick, last question. Someone slipped a good one in here at the end. I mean, all questions are good, but this is from a defensive perspective. Does disabling PowerShell from GPO, would that eliminate the data exfiltration threat?
No, so awesome question. You're definitely spot on. That's a great question. Unfortunately, no. What you're doing is you're definitely raising the bar. You're making it a little trickier. But if you're thinking that GPO restrictions can prevent somebody from using PowerShell, you really need to watch the talk that Ben 10 gave at DerbyCon a couple of years ago called PowerShell Without PowerShell, where he actually deleted PowerShell.exe from a running machine and live was able to create his own version of this, you know, console that he called Awesome Shell. A lot of people think that PowerShell.exe is actually the, you know, the heart and soul of PowerShell is this blue screen that you're looking at. It's not. It's just a UI for humans to actually interact with the underlying DLLs. So you can, as an attacker, you can interact with those underlying DLLs without ever running PowerShell.exe, and it doesn't even need to be on that machine. So I'll be sending a tweet about that because it's something that more folks need to be aware of.
Mick, that is all the time we have today. I see some people are still coming in with comments. Feel free to hit up Mick on Twitter or send SANS here an email, jblanchard@sans.org, and I'll forward them to Mick. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mick for one last final thoughts, and then over to Carol to finish off for today.
Okay, well, thanks for your time and interest, folks. If you want more of this, let me know. Help me understand the level of technical difficulty you want on these webcasts. I can ratchet it up, ratchet it down. If you want more of them, please let me know. And thanks again for your time and involvement. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Mick, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.